Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 337 for Monday, February 17th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcasting platforms, including a video version on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me, as always, is an intergalactic Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, I have come back down to Earth to tell you all about the Render Distance, which is the extended version of the program where Johnny and I were talking about Marvel movies, sci-fi and fantasy RPGs that were Valentine's Day themed, apparently. So there's all kinds of good stuff in the extended version of the podcast. You can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You get about 30 minutes of extra content every single week. And in addition to that, you also have some bonus things like the quarterly hangout that we recorded this past weekend. That's now available for patrons on our Patreon page. That's where Johnny and I go over the download numbers, the YouTube metrics of the show, plans for the future, that kind of thing. So if that's something that interests you, check it out over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. And then later on, not this month, but just squeaking into March, we're going to do another Minecraft hangout with our patrons and talk about what they've been building in Minecraft.
Yes, and I'll also draw attention to the fact that we are now posting a few more regular YouTube shorts. And I'm mostly saying that so that I can, have some accountability for editing them and making sure that they go out. But if you spot those floating around, whether it's on social media or here on YouTube, feel free to drop those a quick like if you're passing by, and maybe share them with some other folks if you're interested in getting people into the Spawn Chunks and want a nice easy clip to send out to somebody. We're going to do our usual thing of the quick login where Joel and I talk about what's new in our Minecraft life. Why don't you kick us off, Joel? What's new on the Citadel?
I have not had a lot of time on the Citadel this week. I had just a couple of scheduling things on my normal Minecraft days that kept my streams about half the length that they normally were, which is fine in my opinion, because what I was doing was not the most exciting thing, but I think necessary to complete this build. I'm still working on the old potato farm renovation, and basically I was adding texture to the paths, the rows between the crops, all of that coarse dirt that you see everywhere to kind of make the farm look like a farm. It was all just regular coarse dirt texture, and I wanted to go in with rooted dirt, concrete powder, brown concrete powder, some mangrove wood, and some packed mud. I find are really good combinations for different things around. Also, spruce slabs and spruce trapdoors for like maybe some planks or steps or something where the land might be uneven and the farmers might have put down some planks to make it a little bit more steady. I wanted to make it look like a more of a traversed farm, like people would walk around. So places where I think it could be muddy, I would be using the mangrove wood and maybe a little bit of the concrete powder. And then other places where it would be like away from a wall or maybe to the edge of the farm where it might be a little bit more dry, open to the wind, certainly open to the sunlight, I would use more of the packed mud and the rooted dirt. Rooted dirt looks really good in amongst coarse dirt if you're trying to make something look like it's light. And so anytime I had a tier change where like I would go from one block down to the next, I would very often use some rooted dirt to place on the edge of that step. So it would look like kind of like the same way we talked about using andesite to highlight stone walls or something at the top. It serves the same purpose for coarse dirt, just using rooted dirt for that. And so that's kind of all I did. The thing is, it's a big farm. There's a lot of paths. I'm not yet done. I'll finish the next time I log in. But it took a couple of streams to get about 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of the farm done. And I just have the wheat farm is what's left, just the wheat part at the bottom. And then it'll be all done as far as the pathing goes. And then it's just gonna be a matter of doing the wall and any extra green space that's kind of connected to the wall. And that's about it, really. We're just about done.
You heard it here first, folks. Joel is in the pocket of Big Pharma. Although, yeah, I think it's looking great. I think there's something so satisfying about strips of like the crops that you've got laid out here not being attached to the grid in the same way. Like you're not building lateral like north, south, east, west things. You're building these kind of diagonal stripes. There's something so pleasing about the geometry of that when it's executed well, like it is here. And it takes me back to playing Stardew Valley and trying to organize your farm in that. But of course in that you're also like you're linked to this tile grid where you've got to kind of hoe out areas to place stuff. And in that, obviously, because you have sprinklers that you can get later, or the pattern with which you can water your crops is important, so you normally just lay stuff out in that game for efficiency. Minecraft has its own efficiencies too, but when you're building something purely for aesthetics like this, you get to branch out and do more interesting stuff. So why keep everything in these long rows where the most optimal crop growth can happen when this isn't a potato farm, presumably, that you're using for food at this stage? So you have the liberty to do whatever you want with it and make a variety of pleasing patterns, and it really fits well with the natural kind of winding nature of the paths and the shapes of the farmland that you've got here.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was fun to set up and fun to kind of think about, like, how would I want to walk around in this farm? You know, you want to have long rows make sense for just simple organization and planting, but at the same time, if you have to go too far down a row without a path left or right, it gets a little bit frustrating. So having cross paths and having some wider areas where you might want to put like a barrel and a workbench and a place where they might fill up a watering can, that kind of thing. And I did think about it as if a player would want to harvest the crop. So I don't think there's any spot where the crop rows are more than 3 blocks deep. Most of the time it's 2, but this was one of my earlier attempts. And later on, I found that the farms looked more realistic if the crops rows were thinner. So these are just a little bit wider in some places, but it does keep it, I guess, more traversable would be the best way to describe it. I don't feel like I have to run across the crops, run a risk of like stepping on one by accident and popping it off. Although that's a problem right now, because as I'm working in the area, as I'm going AFK or working a little bit in the nighttime inside or something, there's mobs that are spawning out in the crop field, and they're walking off of walls and they're walking onto crops and breaking them off. So I've been noticing
wandering
some
traders and stuff will show up, and
exactly. So I've been worried about that. So because not all the crops are on, even if they're just walking across the normal ground, like there's still crops that are on higher levels than not. So if they walk off a block, there's a chance they might knock something off. So I've had to patch a couple of holes. One of the things that I find really useful actually for this kind of thing is the map mod, the Zeros mini map and world map. You're essentially doing pixel art from a top-down view, and you could use Minecraft maps for this too, because they show you the same information. But when you have like something that's popped off, you're like, wait a minute, my perfect row has like a pixel out of it. What's going on over there? Sure enough, you walk over and there's a potato missing and there's just a patch of dirt there. And it's like, well, that's not supposed to be there. So I had to patch up a couple of holes this week too.
Yeah, like I've definitely had that before, where I've sort of wished it's possible to create a zone where mob griefing doesn't exist. I know there's a game rule that you can toggle on and off, but it's global, and especially on a server like you run, then you run the risk of a bunch of stuff not working, sheep not refreshing their wool or whatever, that kind of thing. And so I think it's the kind of thing that where I wish you could set down, whether it was like a beacon radius kind of effect or something like that, where you could just freeze everything in place and be like, okay, nothing touch this while I'm away, because there's inevitably, like I said, a wandering trader will pop up, or zombies overnight or whatever, and they just follow whatever wandering pathfinding. And the trader is the worst, because he's also dragging 2 llamas around with him, and so they're they don't take any kind of care whatsoever of what they trample. So yeah, it's fun though to see all of this stuff come together, and once again, just looking at the wider screenshots that you have of the not just the farm but the surrounding area as well, like it's looking great, man. There's so much cool stuff there now. Thank
you. For anybody that's wondering, we do have one mob that is not griefing on the server. That's the Enderman, and that's a data pack from vanillatweaks.net. And they have others. Like you can pick them up individually as per mob. One of them I think is creeper related, although creepers now have, I think, a setting in the game that you can change depending on what you want to do for creepers. One suggestion we had on the server was that creepers could still damage people, still damage players, but not blow up builds. And we didn't want to remove that, because it kind of like, well, at some point you're just not playing survival Minecraft anymore. And so what we did have, which I believe is an in-game setting still, is that creepers will drop all of the blocks that they blow up. They'll still blow up your build, but none of the blocks will be destroyed permanently, so that you don't have to like go all the way back to a chest, find that stone stair, that got destroyed. So when a creeper blows something up, like all the blocks that it blew up are just sitting there ready to be kind of taken up. Now, if 2 things happen, like if 2 creepers go, or if the blocks go into lava, well, that's something else. But if it's just a creeper, then the blocks still get destroyed in terms of they get broken, but they don't actually get like destroyed, vanished from the world.
Yeah, like they act like TNT does basically at this point, which I think is a great setting. And personally, I think it should be that way by default. But there we go. I have not had to worry about creepers blowing up any of my stuff, nor any mob griefing, because I've not really been in the survival guide at all this week. I've just been called away for various other errands and things like that, so I've had fairly minimal gameplay time. What I did get in, though, was a stream where I beat my best Minecraft bingo time by something like 6 minutes, which I was really happy with, because it was a 31-minute time to complete the full bingo card. And lately it's been really well balanced for a variety of more difficult items, or stuff that requires like a longer chain of crafting or some more strategy, like making a cake obviously requires you to wait for a chicken to lay an egg, which can take like 5 minutes, so you've got to keep an eye on a chicken while you go and do some of the other stuff to fill up the other items. And so there's a bit of strategy involved there, but I got this down to 25 minutes and 19 seconds, which is pretty successful, I think. I did pretty well, and that's by no means my best time for every bingo version, but obviously older versions had simpler items. They were, when we played in 1.16, there wasn't like the depth to the world with the deep slate layers and everything, so it was much easier to get a faster time. So I really enjoy this. I love how Minecraft can be something that you can log in and like labor at for 8 hours. Like I can spend an entire day working on something in Survival Guide, but if I don't have the time for that, I can also just log in and play a minigame for like 30 minutes at a time. And that's a really great way to sort of portion out, like, am I done yet? Do I have like enough time left to fit one more run in before I have to end my stream? Like, I think it's really fun to have a variety of gameplay options there. So Minecraft continues to be fantastic for that. On the list for Survival Guide next is froglight farming, which I think I've talked about a little bit before already, but I have a bunch of frogs leashed up in front of my storage room that I want to move to the Nether permanently, and I do know the location of a basalt delta. And I also know the location of one of the bastions that has the magma cube spawner in it. So I have both of those in mind for froglight farms, and maybe sort of see the rates of either and the moderate difficulty involved in putting both of them together. I'm also scouting out the gold farm location in the Nether Cavern this time around. Kind of like you have on the Citadel, I was looking forward to maybe trying out a gold farm inside the Nether itself instead of on the roof, and seeing if there was a location where there's a nice big lava lake in a Nether Wastes biome that maybe I can do a limited amount of spawn proofing around the outside and get that to work. But I'm kind of holding my breath waiting for some of these minor updates, especially since the one with Piglin aggro not dropping XP by default anymore is coming up soon, and obviously there are bushes and firefly bushes and all of these changes to mobs and stuff that I wanted to cover as part of the series, and since we now don't really know how quickly the minor updates, the gameplay drops, are going to be arriving, I'm sort of biding my time a little bit, and maybe that's preventing me from getting stuff done more efficiently, because I think something's going to come along soon that is going to change the way I want to talk about this, and so I'm holding on to that topic until I have a bit more information and can sort of, instead of having to correct myself after the fact, I can at least get into the full details of how it's going to work from now on.
I feel the same way about my wheat field portion of this potato farm. I can see the potential for a firefly bush here and there to add some ambiance and some color shifting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't want to just go through and finish it all and call it done, only to like have a couple of weeks later have to go back with the firefly bushes and add something. And I've also got ideas for breaks that I want to take from West Hill. Same idea. Every time I go to the donut farm that we have in the Nether, and the lava lake is the best idea. I think it's probably one of the easier ways to do that. But I was just saying the other day that I want to retrofit this with a crafter, so that I don't have to like craft all the nuggets and everything myself. But I thought, well, why do that now? What I should do is wait for these changes to zombified piglins to come in, and then I'll also be able to add, like, do I have to change the chambers? Like, how do I have to make this work for us now? And then when I'm doing that, I'll also add the crafters at the same time, because it's going to involve, I think, changing a lot of like the guts, the underside of it. So better to wait, I think, for all that kind of stuff to drop. And it's frustrating when you don't know. I feel like we're getting close, but it's frustrating when you don't know when the next drop is coming.
Yes. In the meantime, though, we can get into the news because we have a new snapshot and more of the features of this drop are being refined. So, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W07A was published on Thursday of last week. It was a little late, and there was a Bedrock Edition release that had some of this stuff in beforehand, but we'll cover it from the Java changelog, as we typically do. So, the new features include sheep having updated rules for which wool color they have based on the biome they spawn in. Temperate biomes are unchanged from the current spawning rules. The common sheep color there is going to be white. uncommon sheep colors being black, grey, light grey, and brown, and of course a rare chance for a pink sheep to spawn. Now, in cold biomes, the common sheep color will be black, uncommon sheep colors are light grey, light blue, blue, and cyan, with a rare chance for a pink sheep to spawn. And in warm biomes, the common sheep color will be brown, where uncommon colors will be grey, yellow, orange, and red, with still a chance for that occasional rare pink sheep. Major changes in 25W07A. A bush will now only drop when broken with shears or a silk touch tool, and they are replaceable when building, so you can just place a block right in that space where the bush had already grown. The look of mushroom variants have been slightly updated to have an extruded snout matching the cow model. Ambient block sounds in deserts, badlands, and pale gardens, which are only used for ambience, have been moved from blocks to the ambient/environment category. Means they're controlled by a different volume slider. Camels will now spawn in deserts. Bundles can now be found in some of the chests in villages. Leaf litter break, place, and footstep sounds and the grass block breaking sound have had their volumes lowered. This will affect all blocks which use the grass block breaking sound. Cartographers and wandering traders have tweaks to their trades. Cartographers now sell 7 new maps, each pointing to a different village or other structures in a different biome. These maps can help players who want to quickly find a specific location. Cartographers from different village types will sell a different range of maps and coloured banners. Some prices and quantities have also been adjusted. The Wandering Trader now has better prices, more trades, and a larger amount of stock for many items. They will now also buy basic supplies from players, so it's possible to get some emeralds from them by helping them prepare for their next journey even if you don't feel like buying anything. The Wandering Trader will offer to buy 2 items from the list of water bottle, water bucket, milk bucket, fermented spider eye, baked potatoes, and hay bales. Wandering Traders now have a chance of selling these items in addition to their previous trades, logs of all of the different wood types pretty much, enchanted iron pickaxes, and potions of invisibility. There is a graphic illustrating both changes to the cartographers and the Wandering Traders over at the Minecraft.net changelog. We'll also include that in the video version of the podcast if you want to check that out. Technical changes in this snapshot. The datapack version is now 67. This adds tags for blocks camels can spawn on, structure tags for anything that can appear on biome maps, and a bunch of updates to entity data. The full list of that, of course, will be on the changelog for you. The resource pack version is now 52, which includes updates to the mushroom model, changes to how resource packs can affect shaders and post-processing, and some tweaks to item rendering. Once again, more details of both of those can be read on the Minecraft.net changelog linked in our show notes. Major bug fixes in this, at least the bug fixes we decided to take note of. End gateways and end portals not fading away with render distance fog has been fixed. Mushroom snouts not matching cows, that was obviously mentioned earlier on. Standing on powder, snow, and fire at the same time was spamming the fire extinguish sound, so good news for anybody who was getting annoyed by that. The void appearing lower and more faded than before, along with end portals and end gateways being unaffected by water, lava, or powder snow fog. Those have been fixed. Cold cow variants horns were not previously mirrored. Leaf litter generation was inconsistently interrupted by non-grass blocks. The world border produced graphical glitches when moving near it, and sneaking with a sneaking speed attribute of 0 was causing the game to freeze. Those are some bug fixes in this snapshot. As always, a list of bug fixes can be found on the changelog for snapshot 25W07A, which you can find linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Something I'm noticing about the bug fixes is that they're very focused on the things that have been added in this snapshot and less about larger bugs and older bugs. So it feels like we're getting a lot closer to the content for this drop being refined.
Yeah, refinement is what I was thinking of. Yeah, it definitely feels like we're narrowing it down slightly and not committing too heavily to major bug fixes that are still outstanding, because a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff needs fixing in the meantime. And it feels like more and more Minecraft feels stable and robust in a way that once upon a time it really didn't. So I think it's really good that we're seeing a lot of these older bugs attended to in the process of finding new fixes for new stuff, and sometimes they just decide to implement a new feature that requires fixing an old bug, and that's a really interesting time to be part of this game. How are you feeling about the changes in this snapshot, though? We've obviously got changes to sheep that are a little different to the mob variants we saw for the cows, chickens, and pigs.
I was talking about this in our Discord with a couple of folks last week when it came out, and ultimately I don't see the sheep spawning changes really pushing anybody to adventure forth and find the new sheeps in the wild when you can just dye them at home.
Yeah.
I understand why there's no sheep variants. I think we talked about this last week on the show with an email, but when you add two new sheep variants, that's 32 different kinds of sheep textures because of all the different wool colors that there are. And assuming that you wouldn't add a new kind of wool, like what's the point? Like you're going to get the same thing. It's just an aesthetic change. But unlike adding cows and chickens, which only require two new textures of each with two new models, the sheep could require several. I mean, the model would probably be the same. Like if we got like a cold variant of a sheep and a warm variant of a sheep, then there would probably just be the one shape, but then it would be the 16 different colors of each. And I understand why they didn't do it, but it feels kind of tacked on, like considering the changes they did add to cows and chickens. You're just kind of like, well, I guess they did it, but like, did they really have to? Like, I wouldn't have really minded if they said like, well, we're just not going to change sheep because there's not much point to changing the sheep. The sheep are fine. I don't know that they needed to make this change, but it could be just something as simple as because they're now farm animals and they're classified a certain way, and it might be just easier to do it now for something down the line. So like, I don't want to come down too hard on it because it could be like some prep for like maybe there's something that they want to add later that's too big for a small drop, that's more complicated, that involves something that we don't know about yet. So there's a lot of reasons why they might be doing this under the hood down the line reasons, but I can't think of what they might be because obviously we don't know. But yeah, I'm not overly excited about the new sheep spawning. I prefer the idea that Berserk Swan had in our email last week, which was potentially having extra wool. Like if you went to a colder biome and got more wool from sheep, that to me would make sense. But they haven't done anything along those lines. How do you feel about the sheep?
I'm pretty neutral on it. Like, I think it falls in line with the changes to cows and pigs in that they haven't changed the functionality of sheeps necessarily. They've just sort of changed something aesthetic about them that doesn't affect gameplay all that much. And we were talking about, like, yeah, the possibility of sheep dropping more wool. I think maybe that would feel like retroactively they had to go back and add little bits of additional functionality to the other passive mobs that they've just updated aesthetically, and so maybe this just felt like the biggest aesthetic change they could make without, like you said, adding 32 more versions of sheep. I think for non-survival, or at least like non-traditional survival gameplay, the sheep spawning changes have a bit more impact. Like, I was thinking about Minecraft Bingo being able to craft a brown banner much more easily, because I could just go to a warm biome and find the most common variant of sheep there, which would be brown now. And I think if we're not getting an update to seasons in the game for various reasons that we've discussed ad nauseum on the podcast before, I think at least cementing the notion of there being warm and cold biomes by not just having the grass color and the foliage and everything be a different way, but having the color temperature of the native animals feel different. So obviously the warmer colors are present in the warm biomes. You've got yellow, orange, and red sheep spawning there, where the sheep in the taiga biomes are going to be blue. You immediately see that, and it adds to the feeling of, oh, it's probably a bit colder here because I'm seeing colder colors. Obviously, Minecraft can't simulate temperature in many other ways that don't heavily affect survival by implementing something where you get too cold and have to warm up, or you get too hot and have to cool down. So I think it's an interesting way of them continuing to make this an ambience-themed gameplay drop without really affecting too much about gameplay itself. So that's the best sort of justification I can provide for it. I agree it's kind of a trivial change, and doing anything more substantial with sheep feels like it would be high effort with minimal return. So I think they're really just figuring out the best situation for how they can adjust something small on the back end rather than committing to, right, we've got to create 32 new models of sheep, basically.
One thing I wish they could have done is add the snout to the sheep, just like they did the cow. I know it was a small change, and I felt like they could have done more with the cow, but it's still better than nothing. And I feel like adding the snout to the sheep probably would have been at least a little bit of a nod to bring it up to the level that the other farm animals got as far as an update. Earlier this week, I had shared a couple of models I found online, just doing a quick Google search for, different looking Minecraft sheep, and threw that in our Snapshot chat channel. And they're pretty Minecrafty. Like, they look pretty vanilla Minecraft. They still look kind of derpy, but they look like sheep. because sheep have got snouts. That means sheep's heads are shaped more like a dog than they are a box. And I think something we talked about last week as well was like, I wonder how much of the resistance to changing the sheep is because of the Minecraft film that's coming out, and the sheep are being prominently featured as like weird, jokey, like why does it look like that kind of things in the movie, and other merch that might exist, for the sheep. But yeah, I wish they could do a little bit something with them, because now next to the chicken, especially the cold chicken and the cow with the larger horns, I think it's the warm weather cow, the warm biome cow, like the sheep look really, really odd.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's still some changes to come in future. Like, this is still an early pass at this, so it could happen. And there's always the opportunity to change models around with resource packs. Get yourself some time in block bench and try some stuff out if you feel like the model needs a bit of an update. Let's move on to something a bit more positive, though. I think they seem to have distilled some of the more popular changes out of the villager trading rebalance that we saw in experimental features, that I think is still there as a toggle, but they've not added any of the more controversial trade changes yet. So biome-specific trades were a thing for armor trades and book trades during the experimental snapshot, which led a lot of people to say, well, I don't really want to go and have to find a swamp and raise swamp villagers from, usually curing them from zombie villagers just to get hold of mending books. Whereas a lot of people were very positive, I think universally, about the changes to the Wandering Trader, and the notion of cartographers helping them find biomes a little easier was tied into the notion that trades were going to be very different. Biome villages were going to have different armorer and librarian trades, but I think it's cool that they can still put that cartographer functionality in for the sake of, hey, you want to find a swamp? Here, it's easy, and it might even have a witch hut marked on it, that kind of thing. I like that notion a lot, so I think I'm happy with the changes that we've seen there. I'm mostly happy for folks like Mog Swamp who play super flat and are suddenly going to have a lot more options to trade from the Wandering Trader.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too with super flat worlds and skyblock maps. Provided that the Wandering Trader does spawn in skyblock, I think it would be a good way to get stuff that way too. From the one time that I played skyblock a long time ago. And looking at the cartographer maps, it's also a good change. I mean, anytime we talk about something in the game that's going to point you in a direction of how to explore more, find new biomes, find new features, I think that's always a strength. Weirdly, when I look at the table that they provided in the snapshot and heard an explanation of it all kind of like listed out when I was watching Exumavoid do his review of the snapshot, it's really confusing. And I don't think it would be that confusing in the game. I think it's just confusing when you list them all together. And you say, well, this biome has these three maps and it points to these three. And if you look at them individually, they sort of make sense. Like if you're in a desert, you're going to get a map that points you towards like a plains and a savanna and I think maybe a jungle. All of them are warm weather biomes. So it makes sense that a villager in a desert is going to have probably biomes nearby. A villager in a desert is not necessarily going to point you towards a snowy biome. You're going to have to find something a little bit cooler. But then where you get to a savanna, like they all kind of point you to a plains at some point. And then a plains has kind of like the ability to get to like a taiga or a snowy or
it's the gateway to the other temperature of biomes. And once again also shows a bit of a divide forming between the warm and cold biomes, and them really trying to like delineate those as different categories of different parts of the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it makes sense. Just when you list it all out in either a change log or in a table, you're just like, oh my gosh, like why? Like there's just so much to look at and so much to remember. And then you just kind of like, well, in game, like you don't really need. All you need to know is the one villager you're trading with and what three maps is that villager going to give you. That's it, And so it's a lot simpler in game. And again, I'm all for in game breadcrumbs as opposed to having to go to a wiki and stuff like that.
Yes, agreed. And I think this is going to be the case in Java Edition. It might be slightly different in Bedrock, because I know Bedrock villagers will trade you maps to different trial chambers. But on Java, when you buy a trial chamber map, it's always to the same one. So potentially on Bedrock Edition, you could find yourself trading the same map from the same villager at least, and finding maybe 3 or 4 different savannah villages that you didn't know were there. So I think there's maybe potential there for people to exploit the mechanics that work on your individual versions. But I think it's overall a really good change that a couple of tweaks are happening to villagers, but not ones that are going to be potentially disrupting people's existing gameplay and causing them to rethink all of their villager trading halls and that kind of thing. The other change that's happening with villages that I'm personally very excited about is bundles being something that you can find in chests more easily, or at all. I assume they don't have contents. It didn't really mention that in the changelog, but I assume they're just empty bundles. I still personally think leatherworkers should trade them while we're talking about changes to villager trades, but I think it's kind of trivial whether or not they do now that the crafting recipe is so cheap. It was much more of a thing back when they still required rabbit hide, and 5 rabbit hide was the recipe, but now with just 1 leather and 1 string, I think it's not something people are going to go down the entire list of leatherworker trades to get to like a bundle at the end, you know? But I think it's nice that they're at least available, makes people more aware of them if they're new to the game, and ultimately makes bundles a bit more gettable for people who are not interested in going out and farming spiders and cows just to get a couple of storage opportunities.
Might help with your Minecraft bingo too, in terms of
Yes.
just like grabbing that in a village, and this like you can just keep on trucking. You don't one less thing you have to do to make that kind of a speed run, more viable and more useful in terms of your inventory and balancing everything. And I know when you do Minecraft bingo, do you use bundles for like keeping the stuff that you need for the bingo card, or do you just use it in the same way that you always do with like your furnace and your crafting table and stuff like that?
I have on occasion. There is one item on the bingo card that requires you to get a bundle. It's a light blue bundle as well, so you have to figure out where to get the dyes from, if you're getting you're combining light blue, or if you can find a swamp so you can break a blue orchid. And then once you've made any item on the Minecraft bingo card, it removes it from your inventory, so I don't have the chance to still use that bundle once I've crafted it. But the rest of the time, string is so scarce because you have to wait usually until nighttime to fight spiders to get hold of string, and then you often want string to make a carrot on a stick or a bow for a dispenser, or, in the case of a bundle, like you're using 1 string for that, which could be kind of precious string at that stage. So
Right.
it really depends on the circumstances. More often, since it's such a temporary time I spend in that area of the world, I will just chuck items out on the ground when I'm certain I don't need them, instead of bundling them and taking them home to any kind of storage system. But yeah, there's definitely been some times when bundles have been quite useful, just to tuck some stuff away when I'm not using it, and make sure I don't drop the iron ingots on the ground when I'm just throwing out all of the seeds and sticks and what have you.
The other thing that made sense to me was the moosh schnoots, the mushroom cows.
I like that classification. That's the biological description of the the mushroom muzzle. Yeah.
I'm not sure what that is in Latin, but like you get the idea. I still think it would be a unique opportunity to give them a different model or add a little bit more depth to them. Like they still have the funny cross section mushrooms on the back of them. I think it would be cool if they actually had like mushrooms like you get from the nether biomes, like the fungi and stuff. But I would imagine that it's just a matter of allocating resources. Like, is it really worth the time and energy to model a new mushroom when like how many players in the game really interact with one? I've encountered some people before where they've been talking to me about what I do for years, and they see a picture of a mushroom and they're like, what is that? Like, why is that in the game? Right? So it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about like mushroom islands. Like or mushroom fields. Like there's just all kinds of weird stuff that you don't think about very often because you don't come across them very often. Like I think the only reason I've found mushroom fields and mushrooms in the game is because I was using a map, like an online tool to map out where I was going to put my sci-fi zone. And that's it. Like I haven't actually naturally come across one in 8 years or so on the server.
Yeah, I find them typically adjacent to frozen oceans, and I think it's because frozen oceans often generate in areas of deep ocean, which is also where you find mushroom fields biomes starting to pop up more frequently. But that's just one of those anecdotal correlations. I'm not certain if it's actually true, but whenever I'm looking around, again, in Minecraft Bingo, if it helps me to find a mushroom island so I can get mushroom stew easily or something like that, then yeah, like I'll often find them surrounded by icebergs. The big one in my survival guide world right now is right next to a frozen ocean. But yeah, I agree. The mushroom cow snouts feel good. I think it's mostly because if you shear the mushrooms off of a mushroom, it turns back into a cow, and the idea that it would just extrude a snout out from it seems kind of odd. So, like, while
Yeah.
I think it would have been justified in just keeping them as a divergent species and making them look kind of different as a tribute to the legacy model of the cow, I think it's also perfectly fine that they've made them snouted now. And I did see a few people saying when they updated the cow model, oh, the mushroom seems like they've forgotten it or whatever. I think they just hadn't got around to it at the time, and they were just working on whatever load that the art and modeling team had for future iterations of this stuff. So once again, this feels like a refinement rather than a new feature, and it's good to see things being narrowed down to like a few things that they can tweak maybe before we get a release of this one.
I never thought about that in terms of shearing the cow and having it, or the mushroom and having it revert to a cow, because when things like that happen in Minecraft, it's a one frame switch. Like it's not an animation that you watch. It's just a switch, and that probably looks like an error. Like it probably looks like a bug when you do that, like an unintentional, like, oh, that was weird. Like that looked like it popped, as opposed to an intentional change. You know, like when you shear a sheep, everything else about the sheep stays the same, but the wool pops off, and that makes sense. But if the sheep's head changed shape when you did that, it would be very strange. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's probably the same idea here, that they want it to be consistent, so that when you go from one frame to the next, from the mushroom to the cow, it doesn't look like a pop in the animation.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. Well, we're going to move on into the main body of this episode, which is the Chunk Mail Dispenser. This is our third episode of the month, and so this is the one where we usually like to dive into the mailbag and cover a couple of short listener emails that folks have sent in over the month. If you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Keep them short and sweet, especially if you want them featured on a Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, but we usually like to answer a little bit of listener email on every episode, so you've got a chance of popping up at any other point during the month. Joel is going to read this first one.
First email's from Braxton E, and the subject is planting detail. Hi, Pix and Joel. I'm working on a theme park in my creative world city. Things like the bush, wildflowers, and cactus flowers are all great details for me to work with. What other plants or small detail blocks or items would you like in the game? Braxton got stuck in a bush after the roller coaster's track went off course.
Oh no, that sounds like the kind of disaster that's prevented me from going on actual roller coasters for my entire life. I only have one idea for this one because it was like, you put me on the spot, my mind goes blank. I can't think of much, and I don't want for much in Minecraft when it comes to detail. A lot of this stuff comes up circumstantially for me, where I'll be in the moment doing something, working on a build, and then I'll go, oh yeah, wait a minute, wouldn't it be really great if we had this? And then the idea leaves my brain 30 seconds later. But the one that this sparked my imagination for was, I'm working on a theme park in a creative world city, and the words city and park made me think of statues. And I think it would be really great if there were posable stone statues in the game, perhaps similar to the system that's already used for armor stands, but with a blank player model made of that kind of grey stone texture instead of a wooden frame, and perhaps with more of a focus on being able to pose them without the aid of additional like mods or data pack stuff, letting you pose armor stands with a book or whatever. Even if this was using like redstone signal strength, and the direction the redstone signal came in worked out whether you were rotating this way or that way, and then the different strengths could be like, okay, if it's a signal strength of 15, then tilt the head, or if it's a signal strength of 3, then the right arm moves. And that's something players could work out in maybe like a tactile way. But I like the idea of having player scale stone statues, because while it's perfectly possible to build statues on a much grander scale with blocks, I think on a small scale like that, they make a really great addition to like civic areas of a city build, or even like, you know, you're building a dwarven hall, you're building some kind of medieval thing. Stone sculptures are going to be present throughout, like, even ancient history of our world. So I like the idea of them being possible in Minecraft without having to dress up an armor stand and just kind of pretend that it's made of stone because you've given it an iron armor set or something like that. I like the idea of there being a full solid-looking statue that you could pose in a park as the centerpiece of a fountain or something like that. So you put me on the spot. That's the idea I came up with, Braxton. Hopefully you like that one.
When you were talking about that before you mentioned player scale, I was thinking like a block scale, like something like a sub block. And I was thinking if you put a stone block into a stone cutter, and then you had the choice of like running pose, standing pose, action pose, and then it become like little shelf knickknacks, like just little versions of a sword and a shield and a player, like that kind of a thing. That you'd see like on a mantle or on a bookshelf or something like that.
Like action
That's a
figures.
neat,
Is that, that's
yeah,
the kind of,
basically
yeah.
like Lego, like shelf Lego. That kind of stuff would be cool too. But I like the idea of a full scale thing, because you're right. Like that's something that's missing from, as much as Minecraft has like that medieval vibe and that how old is the world vibe. There's no what's the word I'm looking for? Outside of villages, there's no real art in the world. Like there's
Yeah.
no culture, there's no preserved history in that way. There's no cave paintings, like nothing like that. And so that would be really cool to see that. I guess the closest we get is like structures like a trial chamber or something that have like chiseled stone and
trail ruins, that kind of thing, like places
temples,
where
stuff like that.
Yeah, you can do sort of archaeology and sort of do a bit of like anthropological study from that. But even then, yeah, it feels like the art is missing and what you're left with is architecture, which is obviously a big focus of Minecraft in general. But like,
Sure,
I think sculptures like this sort of blend the two in an interesting way that still feels like construction and stonework and everything feels hand in hand with everything Minecraft already has. So it's not a huge logical leap to imagine sculpture being something that you could do in this game. Yeah, that's me. Anyway, how about you, Joel? What ideas did this bring up?
So I've been doing a lot of landscaping lately, so Braxton lucked out, and I had a few things top of mind, but I did still have to sit here and think about like going back through my last streams, like what was I talking about? Because just like you, I've always got something to talk about when I'm building, but when you put me on the spot, I draw a blank as to what I would want. But things like leaf block slabs, slab height grass, which we're sort of getting with the short dry grass in the new Snapshot and the tall dry grass, but I like that, but green, like a shorter version of that. Being able to clip stages of crops and ancient plants, like the pitcher plant, I think would be a really cool way to add some variety to plant life. And then also, just like we were talking about this on the stream the other day, someone asked me what other crop would I want to see in Minecraft, and things like, rice, corn, turnip, cabbage. Like I don't necessarily want to cook different things in Minecraft, but when you are making big farm fields like I have been doing for the last few years, variety is key. We've only really got 3 right now, and it doesn't always look the best, when you're trying to create a different variety of things. And so having some different stuff like that. It would also be cool, I think I brought this up on stream as well, to have crops from different parts of the world, because Minecraft is played all over the world. So rather than focusing on the crops that I know here in North America and Canada specifically, like what kind of crops are a good Asian crop to have? What about, European? What about African? Like what would be good things to have in those ranges to kind of like make Minecraft feel a little bit more worldly. And then detail blocks. This, I definitely had some ideas. Black or a dark metal looking fence post, something that doesn't look like stone or wood, would be really cool. And I'm trying to go outside of the box here and think about like not just like a single use thing, but then something we can try and use for other things. A handle or a knob, something that you can put on any block so that you could make all kinds of stuff. Like think about turning something to look like a cupboard or a fridge or a case or a door, a mechanical looking detail, or antennae maybe on something. Like a doorknob on a flat surface looks like a doorknob, but if there's no door there, it just looks like something you'd hang a towel on. Or if it's on the top of a block, maybe it looks like an electrode or something. Like you could do all kinds of stuff with them, depending on how they would be attached to a block. Rope. I've definitely thought about rope a lot in terms of like something, it could be totally static. I don't need it to swing, but like hanging rope from a mast or hanging rope from a crane, having the rope wrap around something like a fence post or even attached to blocks somehow would be really cool. Flags, as someone that's been working in a medieval city for years, banners just don't cut it. I don't like making flags out of blocks. I think they look silly almost at any scale. It's really difficult unless you're making something absolutely massive. And I think that even if they were horizontal banners, like that would still be fine. They don't have to be pointy. They could be square or rectangular. That's fine. But having real flags, I think would be really cool. And I found mini blocks that I've been using through a data pack at Vanilla Tweaks. They're just retextured player heads. So that kind of a block scale, they're a eighth of a block, but they're very handy. thinking like taking an andesite block and putting it on top of an andesite wall, it gives it like a minuet kind of like top to it. And you can do it on all kinds of things, like putting a wood plank mini block on top of a fence post gives it kind of like a knob, like a railing piece to it. And so that kind of stuff has been really handy. Used like looms and bees nests and beehives for like little knickknacks around in shelf containers. It's really kind of cool. And then thinking about mini blocks, something that would be a light block of that scale. So we've got a couple things, like there's lanterns now. There's always been end rods since I've been playing, but nothing that you could use as like a light bulb. They're all kind of weird and either medieval or like pre-electricity or kind of alien looking, and need like a model adjustment to work as like a halogen light. Like I've got a texture pack for my end rods that removes like the sparkle and removes the little purple base. So it's just like a rod. And I think that more versatile light blocks would be cool. Frog lights are great, but they're massive. And so having something smaller that you could use on like a desk lamp or a pendant lamp or something like that. Basically, a lot of the things that I was thinking of were trying to get Minecraft just a little bit farther away from like that medieval kind of like sword and sorcery pigeonhole that it is in. Because whenever I try to build something modern, that's when I really notice the lack of like sub-block stuff for us to work with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a little bit of modern stuff that comes into the next couple of emails as well. So we're going to move on from this discussion, but as always, we'd love to hear from anybody who has more ideas that kind of take some of the ideas we get in our main discussions or emails and expand upon them a little bit for yourselves. We'd love to hear from you. The next email comes in from Evil Shadow with the subject of fireflies and witches. Hey, Johnny and Joel, hope you're doing well. Recently, one of the villagers in my trading hall turned into a witch, and I lost an important trade because there are currently no ways of curing witches back to villagers. What if there was? Now that fireflies are technically in-game and are part of the swamp biome, same as the witch hut, what if we could make a potion out of the firefly bush somehow and use it to cure witches back to villagers? Would love to hear your thoughts on this. Evil Shadow got the advancement, which villager was that, for curing a witch?
I really like the advancement, by the way. I think that's a good little pun and fits in with the other kind of advancements that they have. And I think it's a great idea, adding some functionality to the firefly bush. Do we turn the bush into a potion, or do we turn the fireflies into a potion? Like, are we scooping the fireflies out of the air in a bottle, which is, I think, something they avoided by adding the bush this time around. So kind of a pushback on that. The bush is probably simpler. And then what's the recipe? Like, is it netherwort plus the firefly bush? Is there redstone involved? Is there a fermented spider eye? Something very witchy, that would make sense. I'm thinking about the different things that witches drop, or that would be associated with the kind of things that witches do in the game. And obviously gunpowder for a splash potion in order to cure the witch. But I think it's a cool idea. What do you think?
I immediately jumped to, what do we call this potion? I was like, potion of de-witching. I wasn't quite sure what really fit. But the thing about this is most potions, I think, have a broad effect which can apply to lots of different mobs. So, obviously you throw a splash potion of weakness and feed a golden apple to a zombie villager to cure them, but you can still throw a splash potion of weakness on any other mob that's going to attack you and it will deal less damage. Whereas if this is specified to just curing witches, it feels very niche in a game that likes to have things with a broad scope. So I was wondering if maybe it could act, because of the Firefly connection, as a potion that gives you that glowing outline effect that you see when you shoot something with a spectral arrow or ring a village bell when there are pillagers nearby. And I was wondering if maybe that effect could be one of the things which allows you to convert witches. It would need a second stage, because then you just end up converting all of the witches by ringing the bell during a raid, because I think the effect is applied in a similar way. But I like the idea of it being a glowing effect that lasts for a longer duration, since spectral arrows, I think the glow effect wears off quite quickly, and that makes them virtually useless when it comes to actually keeping a track of where an enemy is in combat, because most of the time in PvE, if you shoot something with a spectral arrow, it's either dying because bows are quite powerful, or it's just going to run at you because it's aggro on you now, at which point you know where it is. And the only things that have a really long health bar that are going to really benefit from you shooting something and then keeping track of it is the Wither and the Ender Dragon, both of whom are immune to status effects, so they can't glow anyway. And so I feel like glowing needs a bit of a revision, and I like the idea of it being something that we could brew up with fireflies, and then, like you said, add redstone, extend the duration. Now you're glowing for a minute and a half. And in PvP, obviously, that provides a significant strategic advantage that the other player then needs to maybe manage a milk bucket so that they can avoid it, that kind of thing. I like the idea of there being something that applies more broadly than just curing witches, but having the side mechanic similar to the zombie villager curing thing of needing an additional item to catalyze the transformation back into a villager. But I think that has legs. I think it's kind of, while it's obviously a rare event because it happens during lightning strikes, I think it is a little unfair that you have to go to such lengths to protect your villagers. Then again, there's advancements around that already, I think, with like the advancement that means a lightning rod can protect villagers from lightning strikes, and I think you get something for saving a village using a lightning rod. So yeah, potentially there's some, I don't know, synergy there, maybe. The other thing is the notion of a witch hut effectively from that point becoming a villager spawner. I don't know if that feels game breaking, but it would definitely provide a different road to swamp villagers, because you'd find a lot of, witch hut farms would end up being turned into effectively like villager generators at that stage. So I think there's maybe some balancing issues to consider, mostly just giving it something broader of an appeal, but I can see them turning the Firefly Bush into a glowing potion and then maybe adding some kind of witchy functionality based on that.
I think it's a great idea. I could even see the glowing potion being something that turns the recipient into a light emitting mob for a little while. Like, imagine you're watching a creeper skulk around in the dark in a cave and you hit it with a glow potion and then just don't kill it and watch it wander away, and it just lights the whole cave up as it walks down, so you can kind of see where things are, you can see what other mobs are down there. That kind of thing could be kind of cool. It'd be really wild if you could hit a bat with it. That would be very fun.
Yeah, potion of dynamic lighting is what we're talking about here, which who knows? I think that's still out of scope for what they want to do with the lighting effects of the game. But yeah, really fun idea, and respects to your villager turned witch. Hopefully that cure comes along sooner rather than later.
Next email comes from Sage, a beacon update. Hey, Joel and Johnny. Since Minecraft has updated the beacon beam to be a little bit taller and render farther in a recent snapshot, do you think now might be a good time to also give us a way to turn off the beacon's light without losing the effects? If you want multiple buffs in an area, the sky becomes littered with beacon lights that can kill the mood of a build or potentially bother your neighbors for miles. Tinted glass above beacons would be a very easy way to implement this quality of life change. Sage died from being blinded by all of his beacons. Don't look at the light.
Yeah. I do think that it's a real shame, I think, that we don't have this level of control over beacon beams already. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if this is one of those things that will come along eventually and will feel like one of those changes that we sort of think, well, why wasn't this the case decades ago, But yeah, it feels very strange to have such a functional block with effectively an aesthetic penalty. You have to tolerate something looking a certain way about your build so that you can have a speed boost when you're running around or haste when you're mining or whatever. And while obviously we have the fact that beacons now render from further away, great when you're trying to find a location, so as a beacon it performs that role, but we don't have that as an option. It's as a permanent necessity of using the beacon at all. Obviously you can switch off a beacon if you're not in the area. There's definitely a way that you could hide the block and not have to worry about the status effects if you don't want people spotting that beacon from a distance. But you still want to have the effects if you're in that area, and having them without the beam coming out of the ground every 50 blocks or whatever the radius is. Yeah, I think it feels like it would bring Minecraft once again a little bit more into modern sensibilities of, we care this much about our builds now, and people put so much effort into designing everything that having this sky high laser every so often does feel a little distracting.
Yeah, I agree. My brain went to tinted glass before I finished reading the email. I
Right,
knew
yeah.
exactly where to go, right? Especially given what tinted glass does. And we know that stained glass does things to beacon beams. Like you can change the colors in a variety of different ways. So it makes sense that a player might, in the game, just put tinted glass over their beacon beam. And then when nothing happens, like you're just like, all right, well, okay, that's not what I wanted. And I agree because I noticed my mobility change whenever I go back to Dartmouth Meadows on the Citadel. I don't have beacons in Westhill because, of course, it would, as Sage pointed out, ruin the aesthetic of having a medieval village. But it it's not something that we cared about in Dartmouth Meadows. It's our spawn town. The aesthetic is essentially Minecraft chic. So there's all kinds of different builds and different styles next to each other. So we just thought, well, beacons are not a big deal. We'd rather have like the health and the speed boost as we were running back and forth. And Dartmouth Meadows is like a long valley. It's so if you're going from one end to the other, it can take kind of a long time if you don't have Elytra, if you're new to the game. Also, if you're new to the game and you're dealing with mobs, then having the health boost and stuff is also a nice thing if you get caught out farming something and you're out at night. So I do notice when I go back there the effects, but I also, of course, notice the beacon beams. I'm just so used to them now in Dartmouth Meadows that I don't seem to mind. And I've been thinking about a way to use beacons in my sci-fi area that I'm planning, but I want to make them look like they're part of the build. Like I don't want them to just be littered everywhere. I kind of want them to be either look like a mining laser, or maybe they're supposed to be part of a force field, or like I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want them to be something that actually kind of is integrated into part of the world. And I just got to thinking that in addition to hiding the beams, it would be nice if we had an update to beacons overall. I know that we've talked about this, I think, before on the show when Netherite first came out, but Netherite ingots increasing the beacon range would be really cool. Give players more flexibility that way. I was also thinking, and armor trim is not the best example because it doesn't really make sense in terms of like, I don't think players would logically think to put armor trim or armor trim templates into a beacon. But it would be cool for the players that like the beacon and want to utilize it if there was a way to make it look even fancier. Like what if you put something like an armor trim template in the beacon and it gave it like lightning animation around it, or they pulsed, they had like, maybe it had rings that went around it. Just something that you're thinking about, like the 16 different colors in Minecraft. Like what if you could have like 8 or 16 different templates that you could apply to a beacon beam to augment them and make them look cooler or fatter or like different kinds of textures. One of these could be make it invisible. Like if you don't like any of these, that's fine. You can just not have any at all and still have the beacon effect. Like I think that could be really, really fun.
Kind of reminds me of the aesthetic like features that they added to Minecraft Dungeons when that went free to play. Having the little like celebration animations and stuff have all of these extra kind of like the fireworks will pop up, or whenever you kill an enemy, then like some other kind of little explosion goes off, or there's sparks or whatever. Like, yeah, I like the idea of there being a little bit more animation to beacon beams and have them usable in a variety of situations that might soften the blow of them being a permanent addition to that area. So yeah, neat to have basically a way to sidestep that problem instead of just like, we need to cut off beacon beams entirely given the option, right? But yeah, I think tinted glass makes for a pretty obvious choice there. So yeah, hopefully that's something that the team will consider in future. Moving on to our final email of this chunk mail dispenser. This one comes in from Donarath, who is a community minor member of our Discord community. The subject this time is version numbers. Now that Minecraft is updating much faster than they ever have, I would love to see them move to a 3-number version numbering convention that would look more like major update dot minor update slash drop update dot patch update. I know I've heard the two of you talk about how confusing it can be to sometimes have a bug fix or a patch update come in and affect where we thought a drop update would be named. This convention could also allow Mojang to go back and patch prior drops for larger bugs like security issues without confusing what drop the original work was for. Would love to hear your thoughts. Donarath died to a bug that remained unpatched because no one at Mojang wanted to confuse the masses.
I can see Donarath's point, but I also really dislike the slippery slope of having too many dots in software versions.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that drives me nuts when I'm updating the handful of mods that we have on the Citadel, and I'm trying to figure out which version is the latest version, and there's like different betas and there's different numbers for like different versions of Minecraft, different versions of the mod, and it gets really, really confusing. And no one numbers their mod the same as somebody else. So like within the mod version, it's consistent, but one mod to the next, completely not. And this is really going to be a 4-numbered version because the 1 is just not going to go anywhere, right? So you're always going to have the 1. So if I'm understanding this correctly, Donaraf is suggesting that instead of the next drop being 1.21.5, it would be 1.21.6.0, right? That would be how that's going to go. And then any subsequent patches, like if there's a bug to fix in 1.21.6, it would be 1.21.6.1. Already it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Whenever we read the Bedrock Edition stuff, there's 6 or 7 dots, I think, or digits anyway. And I never know what they mean. They're nonsensical to me. Now I don't keep up on Bedrock versions because I don't play on Bedrock, but I do find it gets really convoluted quickly. And I do wonder whether this kind of consistency with knowing the reasons for the numbers, if that would help with the confusion, if it would help with maybe even data pack and mod authors. Like mod authors could say, hey, look, this is good for 1.21.6 and all subsequent patches. Like whatever they're going to patch for bugs is probably not going to affect our mod, so you're probably good there. So that might be good. But something that Donaraf mentioned in the email that really makes me think about what is confusing things, and it's the new update cycle at Mojang, and renaming minor updates to drops, I think is what's a big part of the confusion. I think major update and minor update is far less confusing. I don't know why they went to drop. It's maybe a branding decision, or they're trying to differentiate it from an update. But I think that a descriptor is better than changing the word, specifically because the word drop is used as a verb in software and game updates so frequently. So when did the last update drop, quote unquote, but now we're like, when did the last drop? Or did they update the drop? And it gets a little bit confusing. And patch is another example that's used in game updates, but it's become lingo in software and game updates, and it doesn't really confuse people. And it actually works as a noun better than drop does. I know drop can be, but patch, I don't get really confused when I talk about a game patch. Like I know what's going on. It could be just that it's been used longer in gaming talk. But I feel like that one of the things that's confusing is people talking about a drop, calling it a drop update, or when has this drop updated? And then players are like, well, is it an update or is it a drop? And it's both, but Mojang is just calling it something specific. And I think drop is just a weird choice.
Yeah, I think the thing about patch is it kind of it implies that something is broken, right? Which obviously there are a lot of bug fixes in each of these updates, but I think patch is usually required to mend something, generally speaking, and so that sort of rules out content updates. I think Minecraft is in a really unique position, and this is actually really just a Java Minecraft problem, because you can play legacy versions. You can play older versions of the game. Bedrock Edition doesn't even do this, because, you can't really... You can probably still down patch on Bedrock Edition, but I don't know how frequent it is that people do, unless there's something really wrong with a more recent release. And it's generally so uncommon for games to freely allow you to play older versions that this conversation doesn't enter into many games other than stuff like this, stuff like Minecraft. And I think it's really unfortunate that Minecraft versions are so distinct that they have to be referred to by these patch numbers. Like, they try their best with the update names, but... and recently, like, the game drop names, but it never quite sticks. Like, I am much more likely to call it 1.21.3 than call it the Bundles of Bravery drop, because that just feels like one moment where a bunch of stuff was added to the game rather than how I'm playing the game at the time, like what version of the game I'm playing in. Like, I feel like a gameplay drop feels like an individual event that just occurs at one time, whereas the version that I'm playing in outside of that feels like it's still trials and tricky trials part 4 or something like that. I really don't know. I think honestly players get too hung up on this in general. Like people are worried about people get confused over snapshot numbers when they skip a week, and they're like, wait, where's 25W01A? It's like, we didn't publish a snapshot the first week of the year, so there is no 1 because that's the convention that the numbers follow. I think people get too hung up on, is this next update going to be 1.21.5 or is it going to be 1.22? I'm like, who cares? Did it add the features you wanted? Like, I feel like this conversation is only a Java thing, and I feel like it just distracts from the fact that the game can be enjoyable and fun sometimes when we're too bogged down in the numbers. But it's a problem that we face, both as podcasters about this and as content creators about, specifically focused on Java Minecraft, is that we have to communicate this stuff all the time. It's not like it's an active experience, and it's a conversation with the community, and we have to have some terminology to talk about these updates. I think as long as we can all agree on one, it's fine. And I still think we're in that gameplay drop cycle. We're very early on in this being Mojang's way of updating the game and the frequency with which they're updating the game. So I think we're still in kind of the adjustment period where people are getting a handle on this. And I think people are going to adjust to it over a period of like maybe 6 months to a year. And at that point, if we check in this time next year and say, does the whole gameplay drop thing still feel weird? It probably won't, because we'll have had several more of them by that point. I think we're just still in a time where we don't know what a major update looks like yet. We don't know what a minor update is going to mean, significantly speaking. My only problem now is that we end up with minor version numbers having both the gameplay drop and the hotfix occurring like on a minor version revision. So 1.21.1 added new features. 1.21.2 was just a couple of bug fixes, and it didn't add any new content. And so, yeah, you get a little bit tangled in whether or not something has added features that you want to talk about, or if it's just the latest patch because they added some crucial bug fixes to it. So yeah, I understand the frustration in all of this, and I think whatever they decided to change the version numbering to, if they took Donaraf's idea and ended up giving it a sort of multiple number convention like that, it would still just be an adjustment period. It would be confusing until we got used to it, and we don't really have much of an idea of how long it takes this community to get used to something when it changes, especially when it comes to just communicating version numbers like this. So who knows, is my answer to that. Like, I don't know if it really resolves anything. Maybe it makes it clearer internally that some of this stuff is working, and it makes it clearer to people who are familiar with the system, but you have to explain the system for people to understand the numbering convention and not always be looking forward to like whenever the next major update is.
Yeah, I think it has like a trickle-down effect in terms of looking at the number. Like you think about it like days, months, and years. And Mojang had days and years in their version numbers, and now they've added a month. It's not like they tacked on something on the end, they tacked on something in the middle by updating more frequently.
Yeah.
And if you look at it that way, then once you explain it to somebody, like it makes sense, but like you still have to have that explainer. But I think to your point that the majority of Java players who are not content creators and podcasters like we are just looking, do I have the most recent yes or no?
Yeah.
If yes, proceed. If no, like, is it out? If not, then I don't worry about it. Like, I'm just going to continue to play 1.21.4 until I hear somewhere, probably on the Spawn Chunks, that 1.21.5 is out, right? Yeah. And that's it. And I think that it's important to have that difference. Like when you're in a community like this that's talking about the game like we do week to week, that you do want some of these specifics, because like if you and I started talking about like different bugs at different times, it would be nice to refer to, like you said, the number, when that happened, as opposed to not being able to differentiate when it was an update for content and an update for bug fixes.
I wonder if it makes more sense, given that they plan on bringing out Minecraft versions for as long as feasibly possible. Like, potentially this is the world's first 100-year game as far as its development goes. do you just attach a year to it? Do you end up formatting the updates more like the snapshots at that stage, and then just have it be like, this is version 2025A, because it's the first update that we've published in the year 2025? I don't know if that's necessarily the solution, especially with the snapshot version numbering making sense, but I think the snapshot version numbering is potentially easier for us to follow as a podcast that follows this week to week than the individual version numbers of the releases are at this point. And so I'm sort of wondering if maybe they should take their cues from that and start publishing things under the banner of this is 2025 1A or something like that, and maybe see if the A, B, like the way they release snapshots, where if they need a B snapshot to do some bug fixes after the fact on the A snapshot, then like it just updates a letter, it doesn't update the numerals. Who knows? Again, like there are so many different ways that could be applied, and what matters is that the community gets behind it and understands it. So hopefully we're still in the age when people are adopting the new understanding of how this works, and it's not going to be a concern going forward. Either way, that's probably all the time we have to talk about all this number crunching on this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we talked about today over at our website at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud, as ever, to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any level there gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can participate in live show recordings. You can listen in and chat away in the text chat, sometimes even providing valuable insights into why things work the way they do. So thank you to our community, as always, for that. We also have our monthly Minecraft Hangouts, the quarterly hangout that we just had. Once again, that's in the RSS feed now. And stay tuned for changes on the Patreon page. I know we've been broadcasting this for a little while. It's taking a little bit longer than we expected for those changes to take effect. It's in Patreon's hands now, and we will keep you updated whenever we know any more. We currently have 296 patrons, which is an increase of 2 from last week, and special thanks are always due to our content engineers, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. We are at The Spawn Chunks on social media. That includes TikTok now. So if you are looking for some clips from the show, you can go follow us there and check out the latest. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and other bits and pieces as well. I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be linked at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Stephen and I talked about some of the latest blockbuster trailers for How to Train Your Dragon and Marvel Captain America this past week. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, then go check it out at thecitadelcafe.com or on your favorite podcasting app. I'm Joel Duggan on social media, including TikTok, where I share clips of my own stuff on Twitch. And on Twitch, I'm Joel Duggan, where I'm streaming Tuesday through Saturday, focusing on Minecraft, Core Keeper, and Satisfactory these days.
Thanks for visiting The Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and that's not so bad. That's a really bad bleat. I should do that again.